Hello, and welcome to our training on GHS, Globally Harmonized System, and Understanding the Revised OSHA Hazard Communication Standard. This program is designed to meet the OSHA GHS requirement for employee training. In this presentation, we will be reviewing GHS, what it is and why it is being adopted. There'll be an overview of the revisions to the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard, HCS. We'll review the new labeling requirements and how they are used. We'll go over the new safety data sheet format, how it is used, and how it differs from the current material safety data sheet format. We'll go over the implementation dates for the revised standard. We'll also be going over the OSHA resources that are available, and it is important to note that all of the information contained in this presentation is derived directly from OSHA resources, and that is documents, presentations, other downloads that you can get right from the OSHA GHS website. Okay, so what is GHS? It stands for Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals. This is a program developed by the United Nations designed to bring consistency to the way chemicals are handled and to raise the standards for worker safety throughout the world. GHS brings a global standard to all chemical producers for defining and classifying chemical hazards. It also provides a standard for communicating those hazards through easily understood label and safety data sheet requirements. Elements of this system have been adopted by the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, into the revised Hazard Communication Standard. This standard is sometimes referred to as HAZCOM or the Right to Know regulations. What GHS does is it globally defines chemical hazards, specifically physical, health, and environmental hazards. It standardizes requirements for communicating hazards on chemical labels using pictograms, specific signal words, and well-defined precautionary statements. GHS also brings a standard format with enhanced requirements to safety data sheets. All new safety data sheets will now have 16 sections following the ANSI format. ANSI stands for the American National Standards Institute. Why is GHS being adopted? Well, until GHS, determining the hazards of a chemical was often left to the discretion of the manufacturer or importer. The result has been that similar, sometimes even identical chemical formulas do not always show the same hazards. Material safety data sheets have required only minimal information with no set standard for how they are formatted. This has resulted in inconsistencies in how MSDSs appear, what information they contain, and where the information appears. Some MSDSs look like letters or Word documents, while others are formatted in tables or grids. Some are as small as a single page, while others can go 8 pages or more. This leads to confusion for those reading them, especially at critical times like when someone has been exposed to a hazard. Countries all have different regulatory requirements. Non-standardized information for the same material has led to mishandling and unsafe situations. For companies doing any international business, that has meant having to comply with multiple and duplicative regulations. Small and medium-sized companies often are prevented from international trade due to the costs associated with this. GHS has the support of governments, businesses, and labor unions worldwide. That is because it provides for greater protection of people and the environment. It promotes international trade while reducing the burden of regulatory compliance. It assists countries and international organizations to ensure the sound management of chemicals worldwide. This is how the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard works. Chemical manufacturers and importers have the responsibility to determine the hazards of each of their chemicals. They prepare labels for the chemicals and safety data sheets based on those hazards. They then ship those chemicals to employers either directly or through importers or distributors. All employers are then responsible for implementing their part of the standard. They are required to have a written plan to minimize the risk of exposure as well as what to do if an exposure occurs. The plan must list all of the hazardous chemicals in the workplace. All containers are required to be properly labeled. This includes any containers that chemicals are transferred into, such as spray bottles. The employer is required to have a safety data sheet, which until now has been known as a material safety data sheet, for every chemical on property. These must be accessible at all times. Employers are also required to keep safety data sheets for chemicals that are no longer on property. In fact, they're required to keep them for 30 years. All employees are required to be trained on understanding safety data sheets, chemical labels, and the hazards associated with the specific chemicals on property. This training must occur upon hire and annually thereafter, as well as any time a new chemical is introduced. All SDSs and labels must be kept up to date. This standard applies to over 945,000 chemicals in the United States and 7 million workplaces. Basically, all the workers in the United States are covered under this standard. Now let's look at how the globally harmonized system impacts the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard. While chemical manufacturers will still be responsible for determining chemical hazards, they will not have to follow strict criteria for making that determination. All labels will have to contain standard elements, which include specific information in a standard format. Material safety data sheets will now simply be called safety data sheets. They will also have standardized sections and format. All employees must be trained on the revised Hazard Communication Standard, which is what this training is all about. And with these changes, a worker's right to know is becoming a right to understand. Now let's go over the new requirements for labeling chemical containers. This is an overview. We will be going into more detail in a few moments. Each label will be required to have a unique product identifier, such as the name or item number or both. A signal word that simply shows the severity of the hazards. A hazard statement that lists the key concerns of the chemicals, what the actual hazards are. Precautionary statements. These are statements that reveal how to avoid an exposure and what to do in the event of an exposure, and they're very specific statements. A supplier identifier that gives the name and contact information for the manufacturer, importer, or distributor responsible for the chemical. There might also be an emergency hotline. And finally, labels must now have something called pictograms. These are specific universal graphic images that indicate the type of hazard. And again, they'll be universally used worldwide, similar to what you see today on trucks and on the sides of buildings. Here's an example of a label that complies with the new standard. It contains all 6 of the required elements. Number 1 points to the product identifier. In this case, it shows a general chemical name followed by unique identifying numbers. Another option for a manufacturer is to use a trade name. Regardless of how it is identified, it must match the way it is identified on the safety data sheet. Number 2 points to the signal word. The new standard only allows for one of 2 signal words to be used. Danger is for more severe hazards, while warning is for less severe hazards. Number 3 points to the hazard statement. These are specifically worded statements listing the hazards as determined by the new test criteria. Number 4 points to the precautionary statements. These are also specifically worded statements that indicate how to avoid an exposure and what action to take in the event of an exposure. Number 5 points to the supplier identification. This is the name, address, and telephone number of the manufacturer or supplier of the product. Number 6 shows 3 of the new pictograms that applies to this particular chemical. While this label shows 3, there are up to 9 total that may be used, representing the 9 classes of hazards. We've already covered the product identifier and signal word, so let's go into more detail about hazard statements. Within each class of hazards, there are specific categories which indicates just how dangerous a chemical really is. One example shown here deals with the physical hazard of flammability. Category 1 is the most severe, indicating extremely flammable. Category 2 is somewhat less severe, showing highly flammable, and so on. The distinction is at least just as important when it comes to health hazards. For example, when it comes to accidentally getting a chemical in a person's eye, some may only cause irritation, some may cause severe damage, and some may cause blindness. This is obviously important to know which. Under the new requirements, it will be indicated in the hazard statement. It is important to note that with this system, the lower the number, the greater the severity of the hazard. In other words, number 1 is the most dangerous, number 4 is the least. This is opposite of other industry numbering systems, such as HMIS, that some manufacturers up till now have voluntarily been putting on their MSDSs. They can still do that, but they're also required to use this new numbering system. So going back to our sample label, we see number 3, the hazard statement, says highly flammable liquid and vapor. That corresponds to number 2 in that numbering system. Causes serious eye damage, may cause drowsiness and dizziness. So those are the actual hazards presented by this chemical. Now let's move on to precautionary statements. These describe the recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to the hazardous chemical or improper storage or handling. There'll be up to 4 types of precautionary statements on a label. One is prevention. This will be things to avoid, but it will also include the PPE or personal protective equipment that is required or recommended when using a chemical, such as gloves, masks, goggles, and whatnot. The second category, or the second type of precautionary statement, will be the response, what to do in the event of an exposure. And that could be anything from rinse eyes with water, how to put a fire out, so that sort of thing. There'll also be precautionary statements about any special storage requirements of a chemical and any special disposal requirements. So going back to our sample label here, if we look at number 4, those are the precautionary statements. In this particular label, or for this particular chemical, it says keep away from heat, sparks, open flames, hot surfaces, no smoking. So that relates to the flammability hazard, which is danger in this case. It also talks about avoid breathing fumes, mist, vapors, and spray. And that has to do with the fact that it could cause drowsiness and dizziness. So these are things to prevent. It also talks about wear protective gloves, protective clothing, eye protection, and face protection. So again, these are preventative precautionary statements, and it has directly to do with what personal protective equipment you're supposed to wear when using this chemical. Now we get into a response statements. If in eyes, rinse cautiously with water for several minutes. Remove contact lenses if present. Continue rinsing. Any further information about what to do will now be found on the safety data sheet, but this is the basic information required of a label. Now, something new on the new labeling requirements are these new graphic symbols referred to as pictograms. And again, these are similar to what we've seen on the sides of trucks or on the sides of buildings, but now these will be specific to bottle labels and on safety data sheets, and they'll be universal. And here's the requirements. It's going to be a red square frame set at its point. The black hazard symbol will be in the middle of that red square. It'll have a white background. How big does it have to be? Large enough to be clearly visible on the label. There are 8 that are mandated by OSHA. 1 is optional, and that has to do with the fact of what OSHA has jurisdiction over. But there will be 9 that will universally be used, only 8 that OSHA has jurisdiction over. Here they are. These are the 9 standardized pictograms that will be used and what they're about. Now let's go through these. Up in the upper right corner, you see that exclamation mark. This is a health hazard, but not as severe as some of the others. It indicates an irritant, such as to the skin or eyes, or that it might be sensitive to the skins. It could have some acute toxicity in that it could be harmful, immediately harmful. It might have some narcotic effects, such as causing you to become dizzy. This may indicate a respiratory tract irritant, like if you breathe it, it'll it'll irritate your throat. It might also indicate some hazards to the environment. These are not mandatory, again, because OSHA only has jurisdiction over worker safety, not over the environment, so they can't enforce that part of it. Again, this will be a symbol used worldwide by other countries. In the middle at the top is a flame. That's pretty obvious. That indicates flammables or pyrophoric, self-heating, if there's flammable gas and whatnot. On the upper left corner, you see a pictogram showing a person's from the torso with a light type of diagram coming out of the center of the chest. This is a more severe health hazard and represents something pretty dangerous to your health: carcinogenic, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizer. It could be something that's specifically toxic to a particular organ, such as the kidneys or liver. Also aspiration toxicity. Below that you see gas cylinder. That's probably the simplest one of all. It just shows that there's gases under pressure. You'll see these on things like propane or oxygen tanks. In the very middle of this, you'll see the one for corrosion, similar to ones you see on the sides of trucks now. Corrosions can also be at both a health and a physical hazard. It can be corrosive to the skin or to surfaces such as metals, and it can be corrosive to the eyes. It can damage the eyes. So again, that relates to the health part of the corrosion hazard. In the middle on the right, you see an exploding bomb. Again, this is an obvious one. It relates to explosives, self-reactives, or organic peroxides that could explode. The bottom left shows a flame over a circle. This is an oxidizer, and this could be something such as bleach, which is an oxidizer. And again, it can have certain hazards to health or to physical hazards. The very middle one at the bottom is one that's, again, not mandatory from OSHA because they can't enforce it, but it will be used globally, so you'll see it on labels. And this is one showing a fish and a tree, and it has to do with the environment. So if there's any aquatic toxicity or other environmental toxicity, they'll have this pictogram on a label. The bottom right is the most serious of all, and that's the skull and crossbones. That's acute toxicity. That means it can really hurt you and in all likelihood kill you. So let's go back to our example of our label and look at the pictograms here. And when you look at these pictograms, you'll see there's the exclamation point showing, that moderate health hazard. There's the flammability one, and there's the corrosion one. So they have 3 of the pictograms that are available for use to communicate the hazards. Now let's move on to the new standards for safety data sheets. And they are now standardized. They'll be organized using a specific order of information. The required information will appear in the same sections of an SDS regardless of the supplier, so they no longer can just format it the way they want. There will be 16 very specific sections that will be required, although not all of them are enforceable under OSHA regulations. As part of the GHS, you'll see 16 sections. You'll see detailed information regarding the product safety. So let's go into these sections. Number 1 is the identification. And again, this includes the product identifier, manufacturer, distributor name, address, phone number, the emergency phone number. It'll also have recommended use, what the product's designed for, the chemical's designed for, and any restrictions on the use, things you're not supposed to use it for that could be a hazard if you do use it for that. And again, that identification has to match the identification on the label. Number 2 talks about the hazards. That's the hazard identification. So these are 2 very important sections. Number 2 includes all the hazards regarding the chemical and required label elements. And it'll have the hazard classification, the signal word, the hazard statement. There'll also be pictograms on the safety data sheet under section 2. You'll see the precautionary statements in more detail. And any other hazards not otherwise classified will be listed here. Number 3, we'll talk about what's in the chemical. Includes information on the ingredients, and also if there's any trade secret claims that they're making, they'll have to put that here. Those will be far more restricted. This may not be important to the person using the chemical, but if you take someone to the emergency room, the doctor might want to know what's in the chemical that the worker was exposed to, so that's where this information becomes important. Section 4, another very important section, is first aid measures, what the symptoms are, what the effects are, immediate as well as delayed, and what the required treatment is. So what to do if you get it in your eyes, on your clothing, what to do if you're exposed to it for any health way, ingest it or whatever. Number 5 talks about firefighting measures. What are the suitable extinguishing techniques, equipment, chemical hazards from a fire? So in this section, the firefighters will know whether they should use water or foam, what not to use. Some products will spread from the use of water, like grease fires. Number 6 deals with section number 6 deals with accidental release measures. This will list the emergency procedures, protective equipment, proper methods of containment and cleanup. Number 7 talks about the handling and storage. It lists precautions for safe handling and storage, including incompatibilities. In other words, products that might react with other chemicals so that you shouldn't store them together. That'll be listed under Section 7. Section 8 is a very important section for the workers as well. There's a lot of chemicals that are okay if you're exposed to a little bit of it, but dangerous when you're exposed to a lot of it. And those are expressed in what's referred to as permissible exposure limits, PELs, or threshold limit values, TLVs. A perfect example of this is sunlight. A little sunlight is good for you. It helps you produce vitamin D. Too much sunlight can cause skin cancer. So there's acceptable, permissible exposure limits, threshold limit values associated with that. It'll talk about in this section, more importantly, what are the appropriate engineering controls? In other words, do you have to use a product or a chemical in a well-ventilated area? This is also the section you'll find the requirements for personal protective equipment or PPE, such as gloves, goggles, aprons, anything you have to wear to protect yourself that's required of a chemical. Section 9 is one that is sometimes not given enough focus, and that's the physical and chemical properties. This will talk about the physical characteristics of the product, such as the color of it, how thick or thin it is, sometimes referred to as viscosity, what it smells like. And this is really important because sometimes people have the wrong label on a chemical bottle, they'll pour a chemical in a bottle that chemical is not made for. And so when someone gets exposed to a chemical, it's important to know that you're looking at the right safety data sheet. For example, if you get a bottle that says glass cleaner on it and somebody gets it in their eyes, and you look at the safety data sheet, and under this section it says it's a light blue liquid with an ammonia smell, but you look in that bottle and it's a white liquid, thick, creamy, with a lemon smell to it, obviously you have the wrong safety data sheet and you're in trouble. That's why OSHA is so big on making sure bottles are properly labeled. So this is a way to check to make sure that the right label's on that bottle. Section 10 deals with stability and reactivity. This lists the chemical stability and the possibility of hazardous reactions. For example, ammonia and bleach, if you mix it together, you get mustard gas, something that can kill you, like what they used in World War I. So anyway, any reactivity issues will be listed under Section 10. 11 is again about the health, and this includes the routes of exposure, routes of entry sometimes referred to. In other words, if it's toxic, if you get it in your eyes, or if you ingest it, or if it's toxic, if it gets on your skin, that'll be indicated here. What the symptoms are, what the immediate, sometimes referred to as acute toxic effects are, what the chronic ones, the long-term ones. This will also show that numerical system for how toxic something is under Section 11. 12 is a section that's not mandatory under OSHA, but is part of the GHS standard, so will be included. And some of the other sections will also show this non-mandatory designation. This has to do with ecological information. It provides information to evaluate the environmental impact of the chemical if it were released into the environment. Section 13 deals with disposal considerations. And again, because this is an environmental issue, it's not mandatory under OSHA, but is regulated by the EPA. This provides guidance on the proper disposal practices, recycling or reclamation of the chemical, or its container and safe handling practices. For example, some chemicals will say do not reuse the container, and some will say you can reuse it if you rinse it out thoroughly. Section 14 is also non-mandatory under OSHA, but is covered more by the Department of Transportation. This provides guidance on classification information for shipping and transporting of hazardous chemicals. Section 15 is any other regulatory information as it pertains to the safety and health and environmental regulations. For example, if there are certain food safety requirements that it has to meet, those could be listed here. So any other government regulations or any other type of regulations will be listed here. 16 is a catch-all. Anything else that was not in the other sections can be put here. Primarily, this is going to be used to show the date of preparation or last revision. So let's take a look at an example of a safety data sheet. The very top of it, right under the word safety data sheet, has the old style numbering system, the NFPA in this case, where it has that square on the point with the numbers. This is the old system, and in that system, the lower the number, the less the hazard, and the higher the number, the more severe the hazard. That again is they can be voluntarily put on a safety data sheet still if they want to use that, but it's no longer required by OSHA. It actually never has been. What will be required by OSHA is that they show the numbering system that OSHA now requires and the pictograms and all that. So if we look in section 1, you'll see the product and company identification. This shows the product name. Any others, there's a section to list any synonyms, any other names the product's known under. If there's any identifying numbers, they'll be listed here. It also shows what the product is to be used for, and it's right there in the product and company identification. You also see the name and phone number of the chemical manufacturer. There'll also be the address in this section as well. Section 2 shows the hazards that are identified, and you'll see flammable with category 1 or 2, and this is an example label, so it indicates it could be 1 or 2 depending on the formulation. What the aspiration hazard is, it shows this particular product is a category 1. Carcinogenity, category 2, and so on. It goes to the different hazards. Then it has the associated pictograms with those hazards, and in this case it shows 4. The signal word it shows is danger. So again, this is an example of what a safety data sheet will look like, and it will go through all the sections as we've discussed. So now let's talk about when these standards go into effect, when these new requirements go into effect. December 1st, 2013 is when employees are required to be trained on these new labels and safety data sheets. They're going to be phased in over time, and so it's important that workers know what they're looking at as they come in. They're not confused by them. So everybody needs to understand what they're looking at as these new safety data sheets and labels start getting phased in. Manufacturers have a good amount of time to comply with this. They have to retest their products according to the new hazard standards, and then come up with their labels and their new safety data sheets by June 1st, 2015. From June 1st, 2015 until December 1st, 2015, distributors have the opportunity during that 6-month period to clean out all their old inventory. They have to get rid of all the old products and have them out of their warehouse by December 1st, 2015. And then 6 months after that, June 1st, 2016, all workplaces must be in compliance, where all the labels, all the safety data sheets are under the new standard. So all the stuff that's hiding in closets, all the things that people keep just in case, they'll either have to use them up or dispose of them, or put the new labels on them and get the new safety data sheets. From now till then, there'll be a transition period. You'll see as chemical manufacturers retest their products and prepare their new safety data sheets and labels, they'll start phasing those in. And so you might see both old and new labels for the same product. Products won't be changing, just the labels and the safety data sheets will be. So during this time, you could sometimes have both safety data sheets, the old material safety data sheet and the new safety data sheet together in the right to know binder. But again, by June 1st, 2016, all labels, all safety data sheets have to be in compliance. So now let's look at some of the resources that are available. At the top of this slide, you'll see the website address for OSHA's hazard communication updates, the new standards under the GHS United Nations program. You can also get to this just by typing in OSHA.gov, and then under search type in GHS and you'll get right to this page. There's a quick video clip on the left there that you can Here, Dr. David Michaels discussed an overview similar to what we've discussed here. And then on the right, you'll see quick links to all types of resources available to you. You can actually pull down the entire rule book, the Federal Register, that has all the standard in it. You can look at a lengthy document that shows a side-by-side comparison of the old rules versus the new rules. You'll even be able to review, if you'd like, what the hazard criteria is that chemical manufacturers have to comply with. There are quick sheets, quick cards and fact sheets that are excellent for giving to employees and for employees to reference, that talk about what the labels are required to have, the new safety data sheets are required to have, and there's also a quick card that shows all the pictograms. These are examples of those resources, and again, these are quickly downloadable and printable from the OSHA website. The quick cards on what the standard labels look like, what the safety data sheet requirements, and what the all the pictograms are. There are resources that get more into the hazards indicated by those pictograms, so you can get as deep into this as you like. Thank you for your attendance, and we hope this has been useful in understanding the new hazard communication standards. Thank you.